Okay, good evening, everybody. I'm David Wildstein. I'm the editor of the New Jersey Globe. And along with Save Jersey editor Matt Rooney, welcome to the debate between the candidates for the Republican nomination for Congress in New Jersey's 3rd District, Ian Smith and Bob Healy. The winner of this primary will face Congressman Andy Kim in the general election. Now, this hour-long debate is sponsored by the New Jersey Globe and Save Jersey. It's coming to you virtually with each candidate at their own location. Each candidate will have 90 seconds to make an opening statement. After that, we'll ask a series of questions regarding national issues in the campaign for Congress. And respectfully, I will ask that both candidates stick to the allotted time. If a candidate goes long, I'll hold my hand up. If that doesn't work, then I'll interrupt. These questions come from Matt Rooney and from me, and have not been vetted by any campaigns. And the questions will alternate between the two candidates at our discretion. Each candidate will have 1 minute to answer. If a candidate is attacked by name during a response, his opponent will receive an additional 30 seconds to respond. And I reserve the right of asking a follow-up question before we move on. As I often say at debates, my job is to be a moderator. It's not to take sides. It's not to give my opinion. So I'll do just that. I will moderate. I'll keep the debate on course, and I will look to each of you to make sure that what your opponent says is based on fact. Each candidate will also have a chance to ask their opponent one question. Candidates will have 30 seconds to ask the question, and their opponent will have 60 seconds to respond. Candidates will have a 90-second closing statement. We conducted a virtual coin toss before the debate. Mr. Smith won that coin toss. He opted to give the first opening statement. So I'll ask Mr. Smith to begin his statement.
Thank you, David, and thank you, Matt. Thank you guys for hosting this debate, and thank you both for providing fair coverage of this race. Make no mistake, this Republican primary is about the old way of doing things and a new way. If you're happy with a candidate brought to you by the same team that has lost to Phil Murphy, that has lost to Bob Menendez, and that has lost to Andy Kim, then you can stop watching and vote for Bob Healy. If you want something different, someone who will question and someone who will fight the government when they are wrong and they have overstepped their boundaries, then by all means, keep watching. My opponent wants this election to be about my past while ignoring his own past of naked women on tables and enough ugliness in order to need an alias to describe himself. I own my past. He simply says he was angry. But angry about what? Bob was born with a silver spoon in his mouth and has lived a life of privilege. His campaign ran straight to the gutter with personal attacks, and I've been talking issues and standing with parents at board meetings fighting the woke nonsense. At the end of the debate, you will see that the choice is clear: an establishment candidate who proudly has written checks to Cory Booker and Bob Menendez, or a new Republican who is unafraid to stand up to government when it abuses power. It's going to be a fun hour.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Healy, we'll go to your opening statement.
Well, first, thank you, David and Matt, for hosting us tonight. And Ian, thanks for being here as well. Look, as a businessman, I've been to a lot of political speeches over the years. And if there's one thing I've learned, it's you give most politicians the mic and they'll spend every second they have and then maybe a few more talking about themselves. But that's not me. I'd rather start by listening to you. And that's why, since I've announced my candidacy, I've been all across the district and the one that existed before the Democrats gerrymandered the map, asking people how they feel about the direction of our country under Joe Biden and sharing my ideas to fix it. Common sense ideas like improving economic opportunity and affordability, standing with our police and enhancing public safety, strengthening our military and the joint base, fighting cancel culture and opposing radical curriculums in schools, and most importantly, defending our personal liberties and freedoms. And look, I can tell you that that message isn't just resonating with Republicans, but with a heck of a lot of independents and Democrats too. People are fed up and they want real, sustainable, common sense change in our country. And as their next congressman, I look forward to playing a leading role in delivering that change after I defeat Andy Kim in November.
Okay, thank you. And Mr. Healy, we'll stay with you for the first question. What do you think the role of the federal government in America ought to be?
Well, the role of the federal government in America is very well displayed in the recent Supreme Court ruling with Roe versus Wade. Federal government is not meant to insert itself first into state issues, but additionally into our homes, jamming down radical agendas when it comes to our schools, when it comes to educating our children. It's not the role of the federal government to pick winners and losers. It's not the role of the federal government to offer incentives to one business and not incentives to another. It's the role of the federal government to do very basic things. It's the role of federal government to discuss and enact foreign policy, which I might add, our federal government's doing a very bad job of right now. We've got a supremely weak leader in Joe Biden, and we've receded our place on the world stage. It's the role of the federal government to deal with treaties. It's not the role of the federal government to shove regulation in through those treaties, but the role of the federal government to conduct those treaties with various countries.
Thank you. And Mr. Smith, the same question. What do you view the role of the federal government to be?
I view the role of the federal government to be exactly as the founding fathers intended it to be. Founding fathers were very aware of what happens when power is centralized and a central power becomes too powerful. So they set up intentionally a federal government that is supposed to be weak and is supposed to only provide the protection for the rights that have been outlined for all citizens in the American Constitution, something that our federal government currently does a very poor job of. It is the job of the federal government to provide a military to protect this country against any domestic or foreign threats, and to support the states in their role, which is to govern as they see fit, empower the states and the state leaders to rule appropriately, or to lead appropriately. The founding fathers did not want a government that intrudes upon people's lives, that rolls out mandates, and they wanted to keep it small and simple. And I agree.
Let's ask a follow-up, and we'll start with Mr. Healy. Along the same lines as David's question, one of the major issues right now that's being debated in our country is the fate of free expression online, particularly in social media. We found out that Elon Musk is purchasing Twitter. That's predictably produced a backlash on the left. Do you believe that the government, specifically the federal government, has a role in regulating social media? If you do you think it's a good thing? And what might that role be?
Look, I think the antidote to whatever the current Ministry of Truth in the federal government that the Biden administration has appointed, the antidote to bad speech, as they might define it, is more speech. I think our social media should be open. I think people should be free to express themselves on that social media. I find, what the federal government's doing right now with our social media, you've got a bunch of Democrats that are in power right now that are basically, they want to shut down any kind of speech that they don't agree with. That's not free speech. That's free speech for one party, not for another. Free speech for one people, not for another. If we're going to use social media as a town square, as it often is, that town square should be free and open for everyone.
Mr. Smith, the same question to you.
Bob and I agree on this. The role is very simple. The federal government is there, as I said, to protect our rights. And First Amendment, freedom of speech, is a fundamental and one of the most important rights that we have as American citizens. If social media is going to act as a publisher, then they can act as a publisher. But if they're going to claim as if they are a town square, then the government should, when they step out of line, and they have shown to censor, which myself, I have experienced many times in my fight against Phil Murphy, then government should be able to step in and make sure the appropriate action is taken and that company is held responsible for the violation of the First Amendment.
And let me ask one other question on this subject before Matt goes to the next question, and that is, in Florida, Governor DeSantis has dissolved Walt Disney World special district status. Do you believe, and this we'll go to Mr. Smith first, do you believe it's right or wrong or appropriate or inappropriate for government to take an action based on the political views of a private sector company?
As far as Disney is concerned, I think Ron DeSantis did take the appropriate action. I think this is something that you need to look at case by case. But Disney has proven themselves to overstep their bounds and to be taking advantage of the special privileges that they have been given. And in my opinion, they should have never had in the first place. I don't see this as a punishment on the part of Ron DeSantis. I think this is holding Disney accountable to the same standard that they would hold any other company. You know, there's my gym doesn't get any special tax cuts for bringing 800 people a day into the Belmar area. So I don't understand why Disney would be given special treatment.
And Mr. Healy?
Look, like I said before, government shouldn't be picking winners and losers in the best of times. Right? You know, Disney and what Ron DeSantis did, I think was warranted. I think, first off, having that kind of an exemption, basically being able to run their own kingdom in the backyard of a state, you know, I just don't think it's appropriate. I think Ron DeSantis took the correct action in that matter.
Okay, thank you. And Matt, you're up.
This question is back to Mr. Healy. It was a remarkable week in Washington, D.C., specifically at the Supreme Court, where for the first time in American history, a draft opinion at the Supreme Court, a non-finalized decision, was leaked. And this draft opinion appears to put the court on track to overturn the Roe v. Wade decision. Put simply, do you support the overturn of Roe v. Wade? And if you do, and you were to have any role in the future in crafting what this country's abortion laws may look like, would you support any exceptions or carve-outs to a ban on abortion?
Well, first off, I think the Supreme Court made the right call here. It's a states' rights issue. What I and I think a lot of people in this country take a lot of umbrage with is the fact that this was leaked. We've got to be very, very careful. The sanctity of our Supreme Court is very important for this country. If justices feel like they can't make and come to decisions between themselves without their decisions being leaked, if they feel like they can be pressured externally before their decisions are put in front of this country at the appropriate time, we're gonna have a lot of problems. It's going to get very ugly in the judicial branch. You know, as far as abortion going forward, it's now with the state of New Jersey for our state, and the state of New Jersey has unfortunately enshrined abortion into the Constitution. Certainly, when I get to Congress, I will use the bully pulpit that I will have on the federal side to speak about that issue. But now it's been remanded to the states, which is where I think it should have been back in 1973.
Thank you. Mr. Smith.
So what we saw this week with the unprecedented leak of the draft opinion of the Supreme Court is nothing short of a criminal action. The individual or individuals who are responsible for this need to be held accountable for this action because it was leaked with the intent to sway and to intimidate our Supreme Court justices. Our Supreme Court is the highest court in the land. This is no laughing matter, and it is not something that should be swayed in any way by an angry mob of leftists outside of the Supreme Court screaming. These people have a very important job to do, and it ought to be respected. And we should hold these people to the same standard of accountability that we see elsewhere. The FBI was very happy to raid the offices of Project Veritas and other journalistic entities with pretty much no reason, but we don't see them really going after the individual or the individuals who have leaked it. As far as abortion, the Supreme Court made the right decision. Nowhere in the Constitution is the word abortion mentioned, so therefore it is not a constitutional right by any means. It should be deferred to the states, and that is unfortunately a battle that we will have to fight state by state, but that is the way it works. And I think that every leader from the local level all the way up to the federal level should get involved in this fight and should make sure that children, born or unborn, are absolutely protected. They have a right to live just like anybody else in this great country.
And
Thank you.
I want to ask a follow up on that, and sort of look at what might happen as it results to what you can affect in New Jersey if you go to Congress. So if the Supreme Court, and we'll start with Mr. Smith on this, if the Supreme Court overturns Roe and a Congress in which you serve seeks to block federal funds for state and local projects, for transportation funding, grants for first responders, for those states that have legalized abortion, would you support such a bill?
This is something that I would look to my constituents for. I think that not every decision that you make in Congress needs to be driven by your own preferences. Personally, I would say yes. However, I think it's important that you represent the will of the people in the district. So I would heavily lean into the people in the district to understand where they sit on this matter. Like I said, personally, I would support that block. However, my first interest above anything is to represent the will of the people. So it would be something that I would take into heavy consideration.
And Mr. Healy?
Well, first off, Ian, I'm glad to see that you've come around on abortion. I know that you mentioned earlier in interviews that it was not something that you really thought much about, and I'm glad to see that you're here with us now. Look, I think a block like that, I would have to understand what the details of it were, and I'd have to talk to my constituents about it. I do agree with Ian that it's about expressing the will of the people that you represent in Congress.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. This next question is back to Mr. Healy. There's a national debate going on around the country whether to defund the police, as has been championed on the left, or back the blue, the more popular position on the right. Where do you stand in that divide?
It has never been more difficult over the last 4 to 5 years to be a police officer. We need to be doing everything we can to back our police. We need to be doing everything we can to make sure that they have the tools that are required to protect our communities. And we need to be doing that very publicly. As a member of Congress, we need to be supporting them, getting them the funding that they need. And we need to make sure that we're not casting dispersions on them, casting dispersions on why they do their job, casting dispersions on whether or not they've been bought and paid for. Our police are the bedrock of keeping our community safe, and I would do everything I can to continue to back them all in Congress.
Mr. Smith?
To address very quickly what Mr. Healy said about my stance on abortion has always been the same. I have stated many times publicly that I don't like it personally, but that I would always represent the will of the people. So please make sure that you're getting that info correct before you put it out there. There's plenty of video and there's plenty of interviews that I've done where I have made that very, very clear. As far as the police go, the police are an essential element to public safety. And, the police's job has gotten, I believe, intentionally harder over the last especially the last 5 years, but even the last 10 years. And that is due to the leftist soft on crime policy that has pretty much castrated our police's ability to do the job, not only correctly and efficiently, but safely. Here in New Jersey, we see things like police aren't allowed to use force, even when force is brought upon them, and that just makes the job unnecessarily dangerous when it already is. We've always supported police here at Attila's Gym. Our first responders always come first. That includes police, fire, military. These people need to be funded correctly and be given the tools to do their job safely and effectively, but they need to be backed up as well by district attorneys and prosecutors who are going to not be lenient on crime.
And Mr. Smith, I want to ask a follow-up on that. Your campaign has said that you have you don't necessarily trust the government, after their persecution of you in the past. Do you trust the police?
My campaign has stated that I have a healthy distrust for the government, and that is entirely true. However, that does not represent any organization as a whole. There are bad actors in every element of government. We see that all the way from the federal level down to the local level. We see that in our public schools and our school boards, and we also see that with our first responders. I've always supported the police and always will.
Thank you. Mr. Healy?
Ian, I'm shocked. You've literally talked about a policeman being paid off to arrest you. I mean, I don't understand how that's backing the police. Look, we need to stop casting dispersions on these police. They get enough of it from the left, okay? They get enough of it from people every day who claim that they're racist or anything else. Backing the blue starts with the police in your own community, the police in the communities that you're at. Claiming that a police officer was paid off simply to pull you over, I just strange credulity to see how you're backing the police.
And Mr. Smith, you were mentioned in the response, so I'll give you another 30
Sure.
seconds.
Clearly, once again, Bob is, I guess, not paying attention or needs to clean the earwax out. And I said institutions as a whole, I do trust and support, but that doesn't mean that I can't raise questions about individuals within those institutions. If you need me to clarify that anymore, Bob, I can do that, but I think I made that pretty clear.
Okay, thank you. Matt, I think the next question is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Wildstein. I believe we're back to Mr. Smith. Mr. Smith, recently, the state of New Jersey began selling recreational marijuana. It's no longer available to individuals simply because they have, for example, some type of medical permission to use it. You can now go and buy it, almost along the same lines as alcohol. There's been a good deal of debate recently in New Jersey and other states that are pro-legal recreational marijuana that the federal government should act next to legalize it. Would you support legalizing marijuana at the federal level?
I don't have a problem with the legalization of marijuana as long as it is done in a safe and responsible manner. What I do have a problem with is the amount of individuals who have been punished unfairly, especially minority young men who have been punished and who have spent far too long, I think a day for marijuana is far too long, but far too long in the prison system as a result of harsh criminalization of marijuana. So I do support it on a federal level, done safely, responsibly.
Thank you. Mr. Healy.
Well, as you mentioned, the state of New Jersey's legalized it, and they'll have to figure out how to enforce that on a local level. It looks like it's a bit of a mess. Look, I don't do drugs now. I don't smoke marijuana. I certainly can understand its use for medicinal uses, and I'm open to having a conversation about that. As far as legalizing it on a federal level, I would not be in support of that. It just goes against, try to be a healthy guy. I don't even drink.
Thank you.
Thank you. I want to ask this will go to Mr. Smith. So you have voiced remorse for the death of a man in Galloway, that a man that was killed in a horrific accident in which you were charged and convicted with vehicular homicide. You have said that you've grown since that experience, but the DUI charges that were filed against you in March of this year, I think it prompts a reasonable question about your growth and about your judgment. What do you say to the voters in the 3rd District who ask about your character?
Well, as far as the incident in 2007, that is something that I live with every single day. It's something that has molded me into the person that I am today. It's a cross that I carry with me, and it's something that reminds me on a daily basis to strive to be a better person. In no way have I ever claimed to be perfect, but I have certainly done and tried to do and continue to try to do quite a bit of good. I've spoken at over 20 high schools about my experience at a young age to at youth children and at youth teens. As far as the most recent one, our statement was pretty clear. We maintain innocence. That's why we asked for the tapes to be released immediately. We wanted people to take a look at them, and people have. And the overwhelming amount of people that we have spoken to show support in our statements. And we'll let the rest unravel in court. And obviously, we'll respect the decision that comes down. But we move forward nonetheless. And the voters can certainly make their decisions based on everything that has been put out so far. And I'm more than happy to talk with each and every single person about it.
And Mr. Healy, do you have any comment on that? Mr. Smith talked about your past. Do you have any response to what he said?
Look, David, I'll just stick to the facts. I mean, the fact is, Ian's campaign mentioned when he was pulled over that he was not drinking. The fact is, Ian's campaign mentioned that when he was pulled over, he passed his sobriety test. It's very clear by those videos that Ian admitted immediately when he was pulled over that he was in fact drinking, and the police told him that he did not pass his sobriety test. And I don't know what people you're talking to, because the people I'm talking to seem to have a different take on that video. But the simple fact is, you lied twice. How are voters supposed to believe you when you lie about something like that? Listen, I understand this is a country of second chances, but you had a great opportunity. You had a great opportunity to be a better person, and you failed.
All right. And Mr. Smith, let me give you an opportunity to respond to that.
Sure. Bob, I think the people that I'm talking to are probably all of the events that you're not showing up to, like the Board of Education meetings, fighting for our children. We know you've been invited. We send out those invites quite a bit, and you only really show up to the fancy schmancy GOP established Republican events. So I would challenge you on that one, and I guess we'll see when the primary votes come in, where that stands. However, I don't think it's in your realm of expertise to judge whether or not I pass a sobriety test. I would love for you to stand up on camera and stand on one foot for 56 seconds like I did. But again, I think that's outside of your area of expertise. As far as my statements go, I never made the statement that I didn't make a statement. I asked for the videos to be released because those show exactly what happened. And there's no questioning about my statements at that point. That is why I didn't make a statement. I wanted people to see firsthand what happened. And obviously you are going to have a bias, and the people that support you will, and that's fine. We'll move forward from here. And we like to talk about policies moving forward, and that's it.
And Mr. Healy, I want to ask you clean up nicely, but there was a time where you looked a little different, and you were the leader of a punk rock band, and your songs had lyrics that many might find to be deeply offensive. What do you say to the voters in your district that might question your authenticity as a candidate?
Well, David, look, if people are going to be offended by the lyrics that I wrote, I understand that. I do. What I find more offensive now, 15 years on, is, the direction our country is going, rising taxes and inflation, radical school curriculums, abuse of power by liberal politicians who think government knows best. These are the things that I find offensive. These are the things I think that the people in the district are going to find offensive. I may have sung in my past about killing someone. Ian actually did kill someone.
Okay, thank you. And I have one follow-up question on this. It's for Mr. Smith. Black families in your district and across the nation, they struggle with the need to have the talk with their children about how to interact with law enforcement. does your own experience, do your own personal experiences make you more sympathetic to this issue? And do you believe that that in the circumstances that were, say, identical to your own incident in March, do you believe that if you looked more like Mr. Healy does right now, that the circumstances might have been different?
First of all, is it okay if I can give my answer to Bob's question? Because I didn't get the opportunity to do that. I'd be
I'm
happy to
sorry.
answer.
I apologize. So, absolutely, of course.
I'll answer both of them back to back if that's okay.
Okay.
Bob, you say you sang about it in the past, but you got together with your band in 2019. You created a fake yoga career, launching a website about Bob Healy Yoga as if you've reached some ultimate peace by sitting and chanting in the darkness. That page went up the same day your campaign went up. So let's just cut the BS on that one. I have a past. Everybody is well aware of it. You can go round and around and around with it. It's public information that I have never denied. However, I don't try to cover it up with fake stories. So I think that's a fundamental difference between you and I, especially when you're talking about trustworthiness. That's a question that you asked. And as far as your past goes with the, the ghouls? It's very easy when you have a ton of money to be this angry little boy screaming at the world about rotting babies, and then all of a sudden decide one day that you want to be a conservative because you have the finances to do so. The rest of us didn't spend our 20s, screaming into a microphone about death and darkness. We were building businesses of our own and not being handed corner offices by your own words. To address the question by David, one of the major concerns of the minority community is that there is this not hostility, I guess, distrust and sort of fear in both directions with their relationship with law enforcement. And this is something that is a major problem. I've certainly worked with quite a few people. I work with an organization called Black Guns Matter that educates at low income people about their gun rights, but it also educates them about interacting with police and conflict resolution. So we want to focus on those type of solutions. That is a problem because police certainly are on high alert, and so are minority communities. And I think that's an important problem. As far as myself goes, I don't think that there was any inherent bias because of the way I look. I think that the officer doing the pullover was probably hyper vigilant, and I can certainly understand that. But I don't claim just because of the way I look that people judge me. I think that's an unfair accusation for me to make, and I think I should just stick to what I know.
Okay, and Mr. Healy, I apologize. I went off out of order, so I'll give you a chance to respond to what Mr. Smith said about you, and then give you time to respond to his questions.
Well, first off, hyper vigilant. You ask the guy whether he'd be paid off or not. Okay, that's a fact. As far as our business is concerned, Ian, look, I grew up with a father who created a business with his brother that's been around for 58 years, employs 1,600 people in this South Jersey area. Okay, 1,600 good people. And you know what happened when a tax came through and destroyed our industry? My father went down to DC along with a lot of other boat builders, and he fought. He fought and he actually won something. He got that tax repealed. And then he did something more. He started the RFA, the Recreational Fishing Alliance, to make sure that this would never happen again. Your claim earlier on about what I may or may not have paid to Democrat politicians, the RFA paid that because the RFA did what it was supposed to do. It worked with people on both sides of the aisle to protect fishermen's rights. My father fought, and my father was a leader. My father was a leader because he knew that what being a leader meant is not just fighting, it's also taking care of the people that help you. Look, Ian, the way I grew up, I had advantages that a lot of other people didn't have. It's about what you do with your advantages. You had advantages too. You got out. You had years to change your life, and you made the same mistake, Ian. So spare me all of this moral incredulity, okay? I mean, you had a chance to change your life. You didn't do it. You got pulled over again for the same issue.
Bob, the question was about you, not your father, but thank you for that.
Okay, and let me go to Matt Rooney for the next two questions.
Thank you, David. Mr. Smith, this question is for you, and I want you to put on your political science hat for this one. So in this country, we hear a lot about civil discourse. It's a very popular phrase, but we can't even quite agree on what it means. On Capitol Hill last January and in cities around the country for most of 2020, it's clear that a lot of partisans, but also many criminals and bad actors stepped over that line and crossed over from civil discourse to violence and in some case rioting and disorder. With all of that in mind, our country was founded by men who dumped tea in harbors, they tarred and feathered tax collectors, and they ultimately took up arms against the British Crown. So my question is, at what point, if ever, is it appropriate for citizens to venture beyond civil disobedience in their opposition to what they believe is an unjust law or an unjust government? Where is the line for a democratic society?
Matt, that is an excellent question, and I believe that probably a lot of people are thinking the same thing. Myself, being very, very comfortable with the idea of civil disobedience for the last 2 years of my life, my business partner and I have practiced civil disobedience without the use of violence at Attila's Gym. The entire weight of the New Jersey government, 9 attorney generals, the health department, Judge Robert Lugie, and many other agencies in the state were thrown at us under Phil Murphy's egotistical attempts to shut us down. So where that line is really a good question, and I think that it's the duty of citizens to maintain peace for as long as they can. Typically, government is usually the first person to overstep that, and I think that if you follow that idea far enough, you'll probably know when the line is. When you see a government like the Chinese government who go above and beyond and start harming citizens. I don't think that we've ever really reached that point, at least in modern times here in the United States, and I certainly hope that we don't. But above all, this is a country of laws, and this is a country of mutual respect, even when we disagree. And I think that we should do everything in our power to extend that civil disobedience as far as we can before resorting to any other option.
Thank you. Mr. Healy.
Look, violence is wrong. It was wrong for the last 4 years under Donald Trump when there were protests in places like Seattle and Portland, Oregon, and even right across the bridge in Philadelphia, where people broke into businesses, where people assaulted police officers. Violence is particularly wrong when it comes to political discourse. All that being said, the important thing to keep in mind is, while violence is wrong, it's completely acceptable to stand in a public square or any other public place and voice your how upset you are with the government, and that's something that this country was, as you mentioned, Matt, founded on. But when that line crosses over from a loud voice into violence, that's a problem.
Thank you. Mr. Healy, the next question will be for you, and it's concerning a man who remains very central in the debates and in the affairs and possibly the future of the Republican Party, Donald Trump. There's suspicion that he's going to run again in 2024. Do you think Donald Trump should be a future leader in the Republican Party, part of the Republican Party's future? And do you think, on the whole, his legacy has been positive or negative for the Republican Party?
Look, Donald Trump is the former president of the United States. I think he is the leader of the Republican Party, but the party is a relay race, right? We're all running in the same direction. Sometimes you pass the baton off to somebody else, sometimes you don't. depending on what happens in 2024, I want to look at all the candidates very, very closely, see where they're at on the issues that are facing us in 2024. I suspect we're still going to have rising taxes and inflation. I suspect we're still going to have a lot of this cancel culture stuff going on. I want to see where they're at the time, but I don't think that you can make an argument that Donald Trump doesn't carry weight in the Republican Party right now.
Mr. Smith?
I think the people have made it very clear. The Republican voters have made it clear that Donald Trump is and will remain a very strong figure in the Republican Party. I was actually down at Mar-a-Lago last night having a meeting with him, talking about the race and the importance of strong Republicans in the state of New Jersey, while Bob Healy was dressing up as Boba Fett for May the 4th. So just kind of shows where our priorities are. Donald Trump and the Republican voter base are tired of soft-spined, moderate Republicans who are willing to compromise and work with radical Democrats. Bob, you said it, that you didn't donate, but the record is very clear. You donated to Cory Booker, you donated to Bob Mendez. I don't think that's something that any Republican voter at this point is comfortable with, and I assure you that that's not something that Donald Trump would support.
Any response to that, Mr. Healy?
Yeah, first off, Ian, for the amount of time that you're on social media, you should know that you don't have to post a picture the same day you take it. That picture was taken at Halloween with my daughter trick-or-treating. So good on that one. But, you know, it's interesting. I mean, first off, you're a guy that's said things like F Trump. You compared him to a 13-year-old girl. You called him a propped up moron, an authoritarian. You told everybody that he was peddling pharma BS. I mean, frankly, you're more of a Bernie Sanders guy than you're a Trump guy. You called Bernie Sanders a savage when he was taking on Trump's nominees. I mean, I'm a little confused, actually. Which primary are you running in, the Republican one or the Democrat one?
That is very rich. I did criticize Donald Trump, and he is aware of that. And I think that's important that we criticize and don't just subscribe to a blank slate ideology just because they are a popular or powerful Republican. That's something that is very common with establishment GOP politics, and I think that speaks very highly to your character and your own ideology that you're willing to follow. I criticize Donald Trump, and I stand by that. I disagree very strongly with his statements on the vaccine. However, that doesn't mean that I don't support him. And it certainly doesn't mean that I donate to Democrats. Comparing him to whatever the other things you said, I would love to see in print what you're talking about. But let's stick to the facts. I definitely did criticize Donald Trump. And like I said, that's something that I stand by and I think is important if we want to move this party forward in a productive and powerful direction.
And we're now at the point of the debate where it's time to for each of you to ask a question of your opponent. But before we do that, and I hope we could just get these as quick answers, I want to ask, and I'll start with Mr. Smith, is there any circumstance by which you wouldn't enthusiastically support your primary opponent in the general election against Congressman Kim, who, by the way, has hardly been mentioned so far in the first 44 minutes of this debate?
I would have to sit down with Bob Healy and talk about that. You know, as a voter, if I was out of the race, I would assume the position of a voter. And I think one of the most important parts about voting for a candidate is being educated on where they stand on issues and ask these candidates tough questions. So would I support them? I'm not sure, but I would absolutely love to sit down with him and talk about his plans moving forward in very specific detail. And I would welcome him to host a town hall if that was the case, and just take open questions from the public to not only me, but to every voter. And then we can make a decision based on that.
Okay. Mr. Healy, would you support Mr. Smith if he won the primary?
I'd have to meet with Ian. I think we'd have to talk. I'd have to think, see if we could have a meeting of the minds on where he's at on the issues and where I'm at on the issues. Certainly open to that discussion, though.
Okay, thank you. So now it's time for each of you to ask a question of your opponent. You'll have 30 seconds to ask the question. Your opponent will have a minute to respond, and then you'll get a 30-second rebuttal if you wish. So based on the coin toss, Mr. Healy, I'll ask you to ask your question to Mr. Smith.
Sure, Ian. How many jobs are a direct result of the joint base McGuire-Dix-Lakehurst, and how much in annual economic investment does it bring into the state? And as a congressman, what would you do to ensure that that joint base never falls victim to a future BRAC?
Well, as a congressman, I understand that I don't know the answer to every question. So I don't know the specifics on that. And just like many policies, I wouldn't make these decisions on my own. I would surround myself with a team of people who could give me the specific information that will help me make a good decision. And at the current time, that's information that I don't have. It's a good question. And I'd be happy to answer it at a later time once I sort of look into it and see what type of solutions there are on the table and what works.
Okay, Mr. Healy, if do you want to respond to that?
No, that's fine, David.
Okay, thank you. And so, Mr. Smith, your question of Mr. Healy.
Bob, you are owner of a large company that you inherited. But my question is, you label yourself as a businessman, and I certainly understand that, but you've never built a business from the ground up. You've never started from scratch, not in your business life and not in terms of your personal finances. That means you've never had to balance a budget ever. And quite frankly, it concerns me that you've never truly been tested. So I see your mailers going out and I see your campaign ads going out that you're going to be a DC disruptor. Having no track record of building or fighting, how do you respond to the question of when voters ask, how are you going to fight?
Well, first off, Ian, the business that my family built, we balance a budget quarterly, yearly. So I balance budgets all the time.
With limited resources.
It's part of what I do. And, Ian, as far as being a fighter, look, the bottom line is I grew up around fighters. I grew up around leaders. I grew up around people that know what it means to be a leader, to take care of the people that you work with, take care of the people that are under you. I grew up around fighters, and quite frankly, you're not a fighter and you're not a leader, okay? As far as being a DC disruptor, here's a few ideas. How about a balanced budget amendment for our Constitution, all right? How about trying to pass a law that requires a 2/3 majority to ever raise taxes? How about forcing how about putting a brake on Joe Biden's agenda and forcing them through the courts to allow us to drill so that we can get back to energy independence? They seem like pretty common sense ideas, but I would imagine that the far left would call them radical right now.
Okay. Mr. Smith, do you have a response to that?
Again, I asked you a question about yourself and you talk about your family. I want you to answer what makes you a fighter. You watching people fight and watching people lead doesn't make you a fighter or a leader. You say I'm not a fighter and I'm not a leader. For the past 2 years of my life, I had to fight for the livelihood to feed my family. That's something that you've never, ever, ever experienced. And quite frankly, I don't know if you're out for the job in terms of that type of pressure. So I ask you again, how are you a fighter? Your ideas are great. They're fantastic. I expect that you'll meet a lot of resistance by trying to pass those, what the left would consider radical ideas. So how will you fight? How will you take the pressure of DC politics?
Okay. Mr. Healy, do you want to respond?
Sure, David. Look, Ian, I think a lot of people are born in a crucible, okay? And most of the time, you don't know how you're going to react till you're there. What I can tell you is simply being born with advantages that maybe some other people don't have doesn't mean that I'm not a fighter. I certainly know what it means to fight, Ian. I've spent time building hospitals and clinics in Sierra Leone. If you don't think that you've got to go fight to figure out how to get that done in an area where you're not supposed to have anything, you're not supposed to be able to build anything, you're kidding yourself, all right? I fought for those people for the last 15 years of my life. I fought for our employees when the federal government decided that they were going to put catalytic converters on the back of boats. I created an international coalition of boat builders that came through and got that repealed out of the EPA. I understand what it means to fight. It doesn't mean you have to be loud all the time. It just means you have to know how to get the job done.
Thank you. Let me go to Matt Rooney now for the next two questions.
Thank you, David. This question is for Mr. Healy, and turning our attention overseas for a moment. Explain to us what your position is on the war in Ukraine and what exactly you think the role of the United States should be in that conflict.
I think we should be assisting the Ukraine with everything we can short of troops on the ground to keep them as a free nation. I have a personal problem with Nancy Pelosi flying over there and visiting the president of the Ukraine. Our president should be flying over there if they're going to send anybody. Nancy Pelosi is not the head of this country. Regardless of what you think about that conflict, she is one elected leader for one small piece of this country, and she leads one party of this country. The president of the United States should be over there, just like the prime minister of the UK was, if we're going to send anybody to the Ukraine.
Mr. Smith.
What is happening to the Ukrainian people is nothing short of a tragedy. However, we need to address the root of the issue. And by sending pallets of cash over, like Bob Healy and Nancy Pelosi want to do, that's not going to address the root cause of the issue. The root cause of the issue is that America has lost most of its bargaining power and respect on the international stage. And that's the result of terrible policy by Joe Biden and the federal government. Joe Biden declared a war on fossil fuels and energy independence on day one. In order for us to have the strength to accomplish peace, we need to be independent of the same countries that are providing our energy needs and our manufacturing needs at the current time. So I would focus more on long-term solutions to conflict rather than sending good, hard-earned American tax dollars over to Ukraine when we have plenty of issues here in our own district that could use help from our government.
Thank you. This question's for Mr. Smith. Inflation is obviously on the mind of every American. Certainly, I would think the primary voters, they're going to pass judgment on the candidates in the 3rd district. And nowhere is the inflation problem more pronounced than at the gas pump. The Biden administration doesn't seem to be making a dent. Prices are on the rise again. In New Jersey over the weekend, we set a new record for diesel prices. What would your energy prescription be if the president of the United States called you tomorrow and said, hey, what should I do to finally put downward pressure on the prices at the pump?
This is a very, very simple answer. And we're all feeling inflation, minus probably Bob Healy and his customers at Viking Yachts. The solution is the same one to the Ukrainian problem. We need to stop the war on fossil fuels and we need to regain energy independence, period. I love the idea of green energy and all that, and that sounds great. But right now, it's not practical. We have crippled our economy. We are devastating the middle class at the pump. Myself, I drive a diesel truck. I've paid $6 some for diesel the other day. And the solution is very simple. Open up the pipelines, drill. We have plenty of oil here to regain energy independence, and then we can focus on longer term solutions to our energy problems without costing Americans hundreds and hundreds of dollars at the gas tank every month or the gas pump every month.
Mr. Healy.
Well, first off, Ian, I think people are getting tired of resentment politics in this country. But it's real simple. Just drill. Just drill.
Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. It's time's going by very quickly, so I want to try and keep it on schedule. I do have a last question before we go to closing statements, and that would be, and it'll be Mr. I believe Mr. Healy will be first. If you're elected to Congress, will you support Kevin McCarthy for the top leadership position in your party, either Speaker of the House or Minority Leader?
When I'm elected to Congress, I would hope I have a chance to hear Kevin McCarthy speak. I want to hear how Kevin McCarthy feels he's going to take our party forward. And I want to hear, more importantly, how Kevin McCarthy is going to help me help the people of the 3rd District. I look forward to seeing him and whoever else is running and hearing their thoughts, but I would want to hear where everybody stands first.
Thank you. Mr. Smith, do you support Kevin McCarthy? Will you support Kevin McCarthy if you're in Congress?
No.
Okay. I think we're getting some feedback somewhere. Can I do a follow-up then?
Sure.
Can you name a couple people that you would like to see as Speaker of the House or as minority leader of the House, depending upon the circumstances of your party after this election?
Sure. Paul Gosar is one, and I think Jim Jordan would be another one. I think both of them, among many others, but they would probably be the top 2 off the top of my head. They have exhibited the qualities of a leader of the Republican Party. They have fought very hard on issues that that most of the establishment GOP has been absent, silent, or complacent on.
Okay, thank you. Matt, I do have time for you to do one more question before closing statements, if you'd like.
Oh, it's always hard to pick the last one because there's so many options, right? Yeah. Ultimately, the biggest issue, and this will go to Mr. Smith, because I think Mr. Healy, I asked the last question. Taxes are always on the mind of any New Jersey. And there's an ongoing national debate about whether to repeal the SALT cap that was part of President Donald Trump's tax reform of his administration. Interestingly, it's created a divide among Republicans because Republicans in New Jersey have often been in support of repealing the cap, but Republicans nationally say that essentially to do so is welfare for blue states and almost rewards blue states for adopting high tax policies. Where do you stand on a SALT cap?
As far as repealing the SALT cap, this is something that doesn't interest our voter base, to be quite honest. The only people that are paying over $10,000 in property taxes are Bob Healy and the establishment Cologne and Cufflinks Republican Party. Middle America, this is not a big issue at all. And I think that's reflected in the national sentiment. So I would not be in favor of it. I'm interested in helping middle America, people who are actually struggling, not people who want a tax break just because they're rich and live in a big home.
Thank you. Mr. Healy.
Come on, Ian, knock off the resentment politics. We're all tired of it. All right, man. Look, I think in New Jersey, our property taxes are higher than 50 states, any of the other 50 states in the union. The cost to live here is higher than any of the other states in the union. And look, this is a issue that I would support the repeal of and would make me very unpopular, frankly, in my own party. And that's fine, because the job of a representative is to do what's best for the people that he represents or she represents. It's not the job to just pull the lever for your politics or your party, which is what Andy Kim does most of the time. The guy's a rubber stamp for Joe Biden and that radical agenda, and he's a card-carrying member of the Progressive Caucus. It's how he votes 98% of the time.
These aren't resentment politics. These are simple facts. We're talking about a tax cut that helps the wealthy. And you just said it yourself. You would do it even though it wasn't unpopular because it would benefit the wealthiest people. That's not acting in the interest of the people. These are facts. Bob, you sue the township of Morristown because they wouldn't let you build a servant's quarters on your property. These are not issues that real Americans care about. So, I mean, that's actually an example of when you fought. But again, we are focused on the real issues that Republican voters and Americans are facing today, not tax cuts for people who live in large homes. It's just not on the agenda.
I mean, again, Ian, resentment politics. I mean, you seem to have an issue with the fact that, a company transferred from one generation to another. I mean, who are you, Elizabeth Warren?
Okay. Well,
Question answered.
I'll let you respond to that. I mean,
No, I mean, it's not resentment politics. We're talking about real stuff here, and you may not like it, but it's the truth. You don't represent the common voter. The common voter does not care about SALT being repealed. That's not an issue for them. We are worried about prices at the gas pump. I'm not worried about you being handed your company. I think it's great. It's an awesome company. You guys have 1,600 employees. You employ people in New Jersey. That's great. My issue doesn't lie there, so please don't represent it. My issue lies with the fact that you've never worked for it.
okay, and now it's time for our closing statements. And Mr. Smith, you gave the first open. So Mr. Healy, Mr. Smith, it's time for you to give your closing statement of 90 seconds.
Sure. You know, I never cared too much about politics. Honestly, I was jaded, you know, and then along came President Donald Trump, and he provided something different. He fought the establishment politicians, and he actually gave me a reason to start voting. It was the first vote I ever cast. Never thought that I would run for Congress until Governor Murphy came along and told us that we couldn't operate our business and that we couldn't feed our families and that we had to rely on government for everything. You know, we fought back and we gave people tremendous hope, not only in New Jersey, but around the country and around the world. That's why I'm running, for people and not politicians. I'm running to give hope and to stand with them against the attack on traditional American values. The establishment hates me for it, but that's good. It gives you a choice. You can keep doing things the old way and continue to lose, or you can take a chance with something new and you can win. I'm the guy, along with my business partner, who kicked the doors into our own building after being locked out by Phil Murphy. People really want something new. They want something different. Just south of this district, the people elected a truck driver, an EMT, an electrician, and a car salesman, and a realtor. The people want average citizens serving in government. So I invite you, please join me. Let's get to Washington, D.C. With your help, I'll kick the doors down in D.C. the same way we did at Tillis Gym.
Okay, and Mr. Healy, your closing statement.
Look, tonight you saw contrast, and not just in style, but in substance. And I can appreciate why some people like Ian's bombast, but the reality is we need a representative from this district who cares more about lasting results, not fleeting fame. Look, for my day job, I run a company that my father and uncle built over 50 years ago. And it's called the Viking Yacht Company. And yeah, it's located right in Burlington County. And we do employ over 1,600 New Jersey residents, and virtually every material that goes into those boats is made right here in the United States of America. We're very, very proud of that. And look, our employees are like family, and we've made it a priority over the years to increase their wages, improve their health care, and allow the company to grow. We want them to do a great job, but we also want them to go home and do the same thing that every American wants to do, be able to provide and build a better life for their families. But there's only so much that we, or, you know, anyone can do when Joe Biden and the Democrats are driving up inflation, making excuses for criminal scapegoating cops, pushing a radical agenda in our schools, or embarrassing us on the world stage. I mean, it's time for a change, and I look forward to being that change in November.
Thank you. And on behalf of myself and David Wildstein, I want to thank everyone who tuned in tonight to watch this debate. I want to thank first and foremost Ian Smith and Bob Healy for participating. This is one of the more challenging things a candidate needs to be prepared for. So we thank them for making this commitment so that you have an opportunity to learn a little bit more about them. Both myself and David endeavored to put on a debate here that was substantive, not one where we debated the candidates, but gave them an opportunity to introduce themselves one more time to you. And we hope that you felt that's what you got tonight. So on behalf, again, of Save Jersey and the New Jersey Globe, we appreciate everyone who tuned in. And of course, don't forget, the primary is coming up fast. It's on June 7th. So make sure if you're in the 3rd District, you participate. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Thanks so much. Good
Thank
night.
you.